We'll call this meeting to order of the Woodland Park Planning Commission on February 23rd. And we'll turn it over to our planning director for order and roll call.
Laura's going to do the roll call. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Beginning with John DeVoe.
Yes.
Ellen Carrick. Here. Sorry. Ken Hartsfield.
Here.
Vicki Good. Here. Jerry Penland.
Here.
Peter Scanlon.
Here.
Charles Schrader.
Here.
Steve Stannard.
Here.
And for the record, Jeff Watson is absent.
Thank you. Would you all join us for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, has everybody had a chance to read the minutes? Any corrections, deletions, anything to the minutes? Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Approve the minutes. Go to item 4, public hearing. A, consider ordinance number 1300, series 2017, amending various sections of Title 16, 17, 18 of the Municipal Code for accessory buildings in all zone districts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have a very brief PowerPoint presentation tonight. Many of you have seen this presentation, so there shouldn't be a lot of surprises. This is a application for an amendment to the municipal code of the City of Woodland Park. It addresses accessory buildings throughout the entire municipal code, throughout all of the zoning districts. And tonight we are here before you for the Planning Commission public hearing on February 23rd, 2017. This Planning Commission has had a few work sessions to discuss these items, and what you're going to see tonight is the final product that has gone through all of our discussions. So tonight's proposed code amendment allows for, in summary, detached accessory buildings in non-residential zone districts. So for instance, in the public, semi-public zone district, in the neighborhood commercial, community commercial, the SC and CBD zone districts, right now there is just a blank in the matrix when it deals with accessory buildings. And so it was an oversight that staff does not know how it occurred or why it occurred, but with a blank in that matrix, accessory buildings are not allowed in these commercial zone districts. So the most substantive change to the municipal code is adding accessory buildings as a permitted use in commercial zone districts. We're also changing it from a conditional use in the industrial zone district to a permitted use, subject to all of the regulations that we will go through in the industrial zone. And then we are also doing miscellaneous changes throughout the entire code, dealing with the differentiation between a yard and a setback, also cleaning up some of our stables and the regulations related to non-conforming stables that somehow got left out of our current municipal code. So there are some housekeeping changes that you'll see. But the substantive portion of this code is to deal with accessory buildings in the commercial zone district. The next few slides will show you some examples of some of these accessory buildings that we see. These were taken in the CBD zone district, which is the Main Street, the downtown area of Woodland Park. So an accessory building is a detached building, typically in the backyard or in the back of the building. Looks a lot like this, or could even look like this, typically used for storage, is what we're seeing. I'm pressing the wrong button. Here's one of what you typically would see in a residential zone district, for instance, but we're seeing these in commercial zones, and here's another one in a commercial zone district. So what we're seeing is these really small accessory buildings. They're not dwelling, they're not habitable, they're typically used for extra space for storage for the commercial operation. So here is where we are seeing the substantive use. It is to our table of uses, our uses matrix. It's in section 18.09.090A. And what we saw in the past, or currently existing in this municipal code, is that where there's a P in red, it was all blank. And what that means is that it's not a use that's allowed in these zone districts. So accessory uses and structures with a blank there, just they are not permitted to occur. So staff doesn't know why they were left blank or how it came to be that they were left blank. We are definitely seeing a need for these types of structures, as we saw in those examples, in those photographs. So staff's proposal is to add them as a permitted use, and then to change it from a conditional use to a permitted use in the industrial zone district. So those are this is the change that this entire municipal code amendment really addresses. And then what you're seeing here in the matrix is standards that existed that dealt with accessory uses and structures. And what we did is we removed the standards as they exist and moved them to the zone districts, so that we don't have standards in the matrix, because that's not the right place for standards and criteria. This matrix should just deal with what's permitted, what's conditional, what's a permitted conditional, and what the uses are in the different zone districts. So the standards were all moved in the existing form and existing criteria to the appropriate zone district section. So we think that that makes for a better municipal code, makes it easier to read, makes it easier to reference, and then you're not looking at different things in different places of the code and you're not getting lost. It's easier to enforce the code that way. So that's why you're seeing all of this strikeout in this section. So another change is that we looked at the definition of what an accessory use or an accessory building is. And the current definition simply states that an accessory use is a use or structure naturally or normally incidental to, subordinate to, and devoted exclusively to the main use of the land or buildings. And the current definition states that accessory buildings shall not be larger than the main or principal building, otherwise they themselves shall be considered a main or principal building. So this is the current definition of accessory use. With the change that we proposed, with this amendment, we're also proposing a change. And what we did was we added, no accessory building shall be constructed upon a lot until construction of the principal building has commenced, so that you don't see these little sheds or garages built before the main building. That was an existing regulation that existed in the matrix, so we moved it from the matrix to the definition, which makes a lot more sense. Same thing with this last sentence, no accessory building shall be placed in a front yard. That existed in the matrix, and now we moved it into the definition. So it still applies. It's the same regulation that was there before. And then you'll see another section of the municipal code, section 183620, dealt with lot area, and you see a lot of standards here that dealt with accessory uses, like things that's all crossed out here. And the reason we crossed it all out is because we moved it to the appropriate zone district sections. So now when you look at the CBD zone district, for instance, it's all there, it's all captured in one place. You don't have to refer to different sections, you don't have to cross-reference. It's just much easier to use and much easier to enforce the regulation. So here's where you had some standards, like accessory buildings had to be a minimum of 4 feet from the side lot line, for instance. So we kept those standards, we didn't change those standards, and we just moved it to the appropriate zone section. Now, when I talked earlier about the confusion with a yard and a setback, we went through the entire municipal code, because in some spots it talked about yards as if they were setbacks. And throughout this code, it's an old code, it was created originally in 1969, they didn't use the term setback, and that's a pretty classic, typical planning terminology for what a setback is. So this code has confused what a setback is compared to what a yard was and what a required yard was. And so what we did was we went through, because we're talking about setbacks for accessory buildings, and we looked at every instance where the word yard was used and what was meant by that word. So in this illustration, what you can see is that a yard is from the property line to the building. So everything in yellow is the front yard, for instance. What you can see as a setback is a prescribed distance in front of which it must remain open and unobstructed. So that's the difference between a yard and a setback. And oftentimes, the existing municipal code would get the two confused. So when I say no accessory buildings in the front yard, that means no accessory buildings in front of this front facade here. From the building forward, it has to be either in the side or in the rear. When I say an accessory building has to be 4 feet from the sides, the side setback is 4 feet or 8 feet or whatever it is for the zone district, that means it has to be that far away from the property line. That's the difference between a yard and setback. And so when you looked at all the changes that were proposed in the ordinance, and a yard was crossed out, well, that's because the intent of that regulation wasn't for a yard, it was for a setback. And so we went through and clarified all that. And that's simply a housekeeping issue. So, in summary, again, generally, these proposed changes add accessory buildings complete with setbacks in non-residential zone districts. We clarify accessory building setbacks in residential zones, and we clarify the difference between a yard and setback throughout the municipal code. Now, why did we go through this whole process? Why are we looking at accessory buildings, and why did we make all of these changes related to accessory buildings, especially in the commercial zone district? Staff was seeing a need. You saw some illustrations, 4 examples of where these accessory buildings just appeared. They may have had a building permit or they may not have. But the thing is that these businesses, these establishments needed these accessory buildings and they just built them. So there is a need for this additional storage space. It applies existing standards. Often all we did was we moved a standard from one place to another. So we didn't change standards. We didn't introduce, except for adding permitted uses for the commercial zone districts, we didn't change a lot of standards that existed related to accessory buildings. We simplified and clarified regulations where we could. We allowed for accessory buildings and extra storage space in non-residential zones, and we follow existing historic and development patterns. So those are the benefits and advantages to making this code amendment. The potential disadvantage was dealing with the clutter that we might potentially get when we allow these little sheds, these little buildings in a commercial zone district. But as we worked through our work sessions, we created regulations, or we made sure that the regulations were in place that would put these accessory buildings in the back or the side so that they're not front and center. We created a regulation, a limit of no more than 2 per lot or per main building, principal building. So we've tried to cap any potential clutter. But it does create 2 little sheds in the back or on the side that, some people might call clutter on the lot. But we did limit it. So that is my presentation for tonight. Tonight, the Planning Commission is reviewing these recommendations and all of the code changes, and there will be a public hearing upon which we will hear any members of the public speak, and this Planning Commission will then make a recommendation for City Council to consider. This is hoping to go forward to City Council for first reading on March 16th, and then on April 6th for Council public hearing and hopefully final approval. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman. Are there any questions?
Go ahead, Tim.
Suddenly realized that we have a setback or side yard setback of 4 feet, I believe is what's proposed in this ordinance. And I know that the building code requires a fire-rated wall within 5 feet of a property line. And I also know that certain smaller structures do not require a building permit. So will these require to have a permit from the building department?
It will. It's as a commercial structure, it will be required to have a building permit. And they will have to meet the building code requirements in terms of separation. And that's a building code issue, and so that's why we took out some of the separation requirements that were in the zoning.
I have no problem with the 4-foot setback as long as we're assured of having that fire separation, because that does impact neighboring properties, potential hazard that way. So as a commercial structure, they're required to have a permit.
It's only if they are 120 feet or larger.
120 square feet.
Or larger. So if they're 10 by 12, it does not require a building permit, but it does require a zoning development permit, and we can require that there be a firewall installed.
But in a typical ZDP, you're not reviewing the details of a building code issues. Is that correct?
Well,
it gets a little.
no.
There's some subtle details in that section of the code.
But we can add conditions to a zoning development permit if we believe that there is a safety hazard and that it warrants that.
And just because they don't need a building permit doesn't mean that they don't have to comply with the building code. And we will certainly make them aware that there may be separation requirements and that there may be, that they need to comply with to not be in violation of the building code.
There's a gap there in my mind. And your assurances that you'll require it without having anything stipulated in a code or ordinance doesn't necessarily assure that that particular section of the code is going to be enforced until, and it does. The purpose of the separation is to keep fire from jumping from one property to the next, and that's why they've established 10-foot separation or a fire-rated wall to keep that fire from jumping. And so by having a 4-foot separation and not necessarily assuring a building permit's required, there's a gap.
I believe we can fill that gap with the review of the zoning development permit to ensure that they have a firewall if they are closer to the lot line or the building. We are seeing sheds that want to be up next to a building, and so even if they don't require a building permit, we would require from a zoning standpoint that they include the OSB to be included for that firewall rating.
Well, without getting into
Additional
details,
drywall.
there's more involved in that separation between two structures. It would be gypsum board, not OSB, but anyway.
Gypsum board.
But again, the building code doesn't even require a building permit for anything under 120 square feet. So the permit is not the question. The question is the applicant, whoever's building this, needs to be aware that there are building.
Is that building code, not the, or is that local city ordinance
It's the building code.
adaptation?
It's building code.
So the building code even acknowledges anything on 120 square feet in a commercial zone doesn't need any kind of a building permit. So they've already kind of washed their hands at things under 120 square feet. But the thing is, there are code restrictions. There are building code restrictions related to fire separation. And you still have to comply with them even if you don't need a building permit. And so I think it behooves us in zoning to let this applicant be aware that he may have some building code requirements that would affect this even if he doesn't need a permit. And we certainly would do that. It's a building code issue.
When you receive a request for that, or you find out somebody's doing something, they still have to have ZDP.
Yes.
And when they have that ZDP, will they be notified if it's less than 5 feet that they have to comply with the fire regulation?
Well, and with the fire regulation depends on the construction, the windows, the opening, all of those other criteria. So it's not just a 5-foot separation, or if you're within 5 feet or 4 feet. It all depends on the construction and how you're constructing it.
But you require that, you as planning.
As a planner, we just look at the zoning and the placement and the setbacks. If they're close to another building, we would say you may need to make sure that you comply with the building
And
code.
the
That's
building
what we would
department
say.
makes that decision?
The building department would make the decision when they look at something that's over 120 square feet. That goes through a
If it's under 120
permit.
square feet and it's 4 feet,
They don't even look at it. But we would, as the zoning department, say to them, we would say to the applicant, you may be subject to building requirements. You should check with the building department.
if the building department doesn't look at anything under 120 square feet, and neither do you, how does it get checked?
The onus is on the applicant to comply with the building code.
How?
We would tell them, check with the building officials to find out, even though you don't need a permit, whether there are any requirements that you have to meet.
I just see his point that somewhere that's gotta be stated.
Where's it enforced? Who's gonna check to see,
Yeah.
once it's built, whether it's legal?
We could refer to the building department. I mean, I checked with our inspector today about a similar situation and make a condition that they include safety describe what a firewall is.
I think that would be a good thing to add to that. Does that need to be an amendment from Ken?
Or require the building department review anything closer than 5 feet.
We can't require them to review because their code is already set. We can ask them for their input, and then we can condition the ZDP for with the
As a
fire,
referral, so we could
as a
refer
referral.
any accessory building to the building department to look at, and then they could say, you might need to look at your
If-
separation requirements.
Who
they
enforces
would-
the firewall for under 120 square feet? Does the city?
There is no enforcement,
There
because
isn't.
there's no
That's the
building
whole
permit.
point.
Yeah.
There's no building permit required. The onus is on the applicant to comply with the code. If he chooses not to comply with the code, then he's in violation of the building code. And the enforcement would come through the building department.
After the block burns down, we'll slap his hand. That's not right.
Well, look at it from this perspective, that the building department has already said, we're not concerned about structures that are not greater than 120 square feet. And in the residential section, they've upped that to 200 square feet. So they're not really believing that there is a huge hazard with these small
In
structures.
residential, isn't it an 8-foot setback from the property line?
No, it's a 4
I've heard
foot.
so.
It seems to me that there's a far greater risk and a far greater need for a firewall in a downtown area where everything is close to each other compared to residential, that's all.
So, Mr. Chairman, perhaps the approach would be to request an amendment to the building code to remove the waiver of a building permit and to require building permits for all commercial structures, whether they're under 120 square feet or more.
Is that
Perhaps
another
that's the right
separate issue?
approach.
That would be a separate issue that the Board of Review would look at.
If there's that concern, because it is a building issue, not a zoning issue.
Then this commission could make that recommendation that would refer that to the Board of Review to review that.
We could make that recommendation to the Board of Review to consider it.
Put it down, he did it, so we'd want somebody. Teasing, that's a good
That's
point.
fine. I'll take responsibility for it.
No, that's fine.
No, I think that's a good point. I think the issue needs to be addressed.
Will the second issue, will the ZDP review the accounting for parking spaces? So if they drop one of these buildings in an existing parking space and they no longer have enough spaces,
Right.
you'll catch that in the ZDP.
Yes. Because the ZDP is essentially a site plan, and we'll look at where they're putting it, and if they're obstructing parking,
Right.
very good point.
Yeah.
Well, the addition of a auxiliary structure could actually increase the parking requirements as well.
It could. But typically, these are storage facilities, not extra retail space or extra.
Depending on size, there's an occupant load for storage buildings as well. I'm sure that equates into parking.
Right. And it could. It could. But it will, that definitely. Parking is something that zoning looks at. Absolutely.
Good point. Are we done? You said you were done. Anybody else got
That's
questions?
my questions.
I've got a couple things. With the CBD area, there, with the rules and regulations with this amendment, none of those buildings will be able to have any outbuildings.
Well,
Because of the way that, I mean,
a couple of those examples, let me just go back, were in the CBD, for instance. Let me go back here.
Yeah, they were.
I mean, I'm talking about actually on Highway 24 Midland.
Right, well, Dana's Dance, right here, is, this is an accessory building in the back, very limited site, you're absolutely right. Many of the lots in the CBD zone district are very small, but there is space. I don't know if she has space for two, we would allow up to two, but it all depends. But she has the one, so this is an example in the CBD, and as a matter of fact, so is this one down here, which is the, That has a little bit more space. It's not on Highway 24, but again, it's a CBD zone district. And then I think the CenturyLink building, it's CBD as well. Very small lot. You can see how tight it is. And I think actually this building is CBD as well. So all of the examples were CBD.
With the requirements, though, I thought I had read that it has to be within the accessory building cannot be within 25 foot of an actual residential structure. With that being said, I mean, it really, really limits you. I went through town just driving around, just looking at different things, and out of 100 businesses, I found 6 that are to be determined open lots, 94 left. 17 of those businesses would be allowed to have a shed based on setbacks. Most of the buildings, you have all the parking up front, you have the building, and you have either a retaining wall or roads behind it. With that being said, 82% of going along Highway 24 from Walmart all the way up to Park State Bank, 82% of them probably cannot have an outbuilding.
And that may be the case. Do know that the zero, in the CBD zone, the 0 side yard setbacks except 15 feet where the where it abuts a residential zone, we didn't make those up. Those were existing regulations.
But then if we're going to adopt a new ordinance, it needs to be something that is applicable to the majority of the businesses. Basically, you're hindering businesses to be able to expand. Not
Well-
all of us keep shovels in our sheds.
Well, adjacency to a residential zone district this is a way to mitigate those impacts between businesses and residential zones. And that's why there's that extra setback protection as a buffer when you get to the edge of a zone district. And
Then-
that's existed for quite some time.
But then you're not going to be able to, these businesses will not be able to have sheds. Therefore,
they
you're
may not.
hindering their ability
And
to
it just may
And
not.
they
convert-
just may
to
not
have
be able to.
commerce. You're hindering their ability to have commerce.
Well, I would then say that it's a design issue and that they should be looking at a different lot that suits their needs.
Right now, for example, with my building that I bought in the height of the recession in 2010, I have put over 10% more above my purchase price in improvements. That building was just appraised a couple months ago, and it's worth less than it was in 2010. Buildings are they're not going up in value. I mean, and where am I going to go when my building's worth less? From the height of the recession. There's too much hindrance, there's too much control. And we should be trying to help businesses get bigger and better so you can have more sales tax.
This is good. I'm not sure I understand your argument, but in commercial properties, typically the owner would want to maximize their footprint on that property and not necessarily utilize a accessory structure. If they can have a primary structure and maximize their floor area on a commercial property, that is usually the advantage, not necessarily to have an accessory structure. It's the accessory structures are usually the anomalies to maximizing the value of a commercial site.
It's not the value, it's very valuable as far as being able to, when I get a load of furniture in, stuff them in the shed, wait for the person to come and pick them up, and then my shed's cleared out. It's used for a temporary use, just for holding inventory as the customers come in. With our particular building, for example, it's actually 3 lots. And, you know, I can't expand on I can, but it'll all be in the negative. If I go to Park State Bank or Vectra Bank, I have to put 25% down on an expansion. Why would I expand when my building's going down in value?
Well,
So
and
if I can have a couple extra sheds, or maybe, you know, I mean, you're hindering people that basically some of the businesses are holding on by teeth and nail. I know somebody that's living in a barn. Marriages are being broken up because they're trying to keep their businesses together. And I feel that, 85% or 82% of the businesses that cannot conduct business, because of the regulations in this, with having an accessory building which might mean an extra $5,000 in their pocket by the end of the year, well, so be it.
But this regulation allows for accessory buildings, so
Yeah,
it's
but you're-
giving them that
The
flexibility
whole
where
point
it
of
doesn't
this
exist
is
right
that
now.
this code is silent on
Right.
what is permitted or not permitted, so.
It's not
where
silent, it's
there's-
not permitted.
It's not permitted.
Okay, it's not permitted, so it seems to me we're giving an opportunity for those who have the space. If you don't have the space, there's not an opportunity. But we can't fix that. What we can do is make it easier, which I think this does, for those businesses who have the space to erect this type of structure.
Rather than expanding, which is more expensive, you're right, and there may not be as much of a return on it. So this gives you the opportunity to have up to 2 accessory buildings.
I mean, if you look at like Pikes Peak Auto Body, I mean, they have probably 4 accessory buildings within that
And
area.
this does not retroactively deal, everything's gonna be grandfathered up to this point forward is all we can do.
But what happens if they could make an extra 40 grand because they build another outbuilding and they're doing car details right after they fix your bumper?
That's
And they
not
make
the
an extra.
purpose of us here to do that. We're not here to decide who makes money and who doesn't as far as a business. There are so many variables. You could be a lousy business person. There's a million reasons why. That's not our charge to do that here. We
But
talked
limiting-
about this at the last meeting, you brought that up before.
But limiting it to 2, yes, you are.
We're not limiting the size, so they could have one larger building, which is 4 times the size of a storage shed.
Absolutely correct. We're not limiting the size. They could have 2 as long as they're smaller than the principal building.
They could take the walls down of what they have to make sure they only have 2.
They could put up a huge accessory building that is, as long as it's smaller than the main building, it's permitted. We're talking on the short end, under 120. They've got the ability now to add whatever they need to. It just can't be retail space, or it's got to apply for code and all that kind of stuff. It's got to be built to spec. This way they don't have to build it to be occupied. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff does have a recommendation in the staff report for consideration.
Thank you. We're now going to open for public comment.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you sign up? Did you sign up? Did he sign up? That's okay, we're just telling you, next time sign up, sure, come on up here, Jim.
My name's Jerry Good. I reside at 1005 Sun Valley Drive. Thank you for thinking of us businesses and giving us the opportunity. I want to point out that our business has increased tenfold since we've taken over. There's many reasons for it, but one of the reasons, as Vicki touched on, was the ability to have product available for people to take with them. It's a huge advantage, a need. So that said, again, thank you. But I would just caution you from restricting a business. This building code permit for a 10 by 12 shed. If it's in a commercial district, that means you have to have a B licensed commercial contractor. You have to have architectural drawings, and it increases the cost a lot. I don't think it's necessary. I would request that you guys rethink that one. I think that the city can oversight with the ZDP as to setbacks and can watch that as an oversight. But the less rules we have, the better we are. We don't need giant government on a local level. So anyway, my point of contention is this permit for a 10 by 12 shed. Thank you.
Anybody else like to come forward? Seeing nobody, we'll close the public comment. Do we have any rebuttal from the applicant? No, city's not going to say anything. Any final questions? Okay. The question would be, is the motion that's on the floor is to pass this with his amendment to add it to the Board of Review for what? How do you want to word that?
I think the recommendation stands on its own, so you can deal with the regulations on their own, and then you can have a separate motion to suggest to the Board of Review to consider an amendment for however you want to word your amendment.
Is that acceptable?
So, concern, does that progress up to the council then? If we make a separate motion?
Oh, Board of Review for a code amendment, doesn't that go to council?
We can include it in the minutes, and Laura can make a note on here that there was an additional recommendation for the Board of Review,
If that was
so
included in-
council can see it.
Just concerned, I'd like the council to see that, so I would agree to that.
So let's have a motion and a second on the original one. Okay, Mr. Peter Scallon, and we got Charles Schroeder as a second. We have Mr. Scallon as a motion and Mr. Schroeder as a second. Okay,
Thank you
you're welcome.
for talking
Okay.
process.
All right, so with roll call, we'll begin with Mr. John DeVoe,
Yes.
Ms. Ellen Carrick,
Yes.
Mr. Ken Hartsfield,
Yes.
Ms. Vicky Good,
No.
Mr. Jerry Penland,
Yes.
Mr. Peter Scanlon,
Yes.
Charles Schrader,
Yes.
Steve Stanton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Now, could we entertain, would you help word that, how you want to say that, so that it's acceptable?
It sounds as if you would like to recommend to the Board of Review their consideration of building permits for accessory structures less than 120 square feet in the commercial zone.
That are less than 5 feet from the property line. That's the critical issue.
The only thing we're really concerned about is the
Or
firewall,
adjacent
right?
to buildings.
Yeah,
I mean,
firewall,
there's
so-
the other problem.
Yeah.
If it's only concerned about a firewall, can't we just make Board of Review concerning that firewall?
Well,
Without having to mess with a permit?
well, no, you have to have a permit in order to require the firewall.
Okay. So it'd be anything less than 5 feet, anything over that, you're fine.
Anything less than 120 square.
Right. Oh, I'm talking about
See, you're
distance rather than the dimension.
Yeah. Well, right now, a building permit is required if it's 121 square feet. So we're only talking about the very small accessory structures. And I think you're talking about just in the commercial zones. Because residential, you typically have much larger areas to deal with and not as compact building structures.
But in areas that are less than 5 feet.
So if it's in the middle of the property and it's 120 square
cares?
feet, the issue doesn't
cares?
apply.
Right.
So,
If
let's
it's-
stipulate 120, less than 120 square feet within 5 feet of the property line. Both those criteria would,
Within 5 feet of the property
Yes.
line.
But don't you want to be within 5 feet of another building?
It's
That's when you
also-
Or
start.
10 feet from another building.
See,
10 feet
it's
for another
also
building.
adjacency to the building.
Right. So if your neighbor's building on the property
right,
line,
there are,
then you have to back up more.
You girls can finish.
no, you could both build on the property line in the central business district, provided you have proper fire separation.
Yes.
Even
Or-
an old building.
Firewalls.
If I wanted to build a 10 by 10 building,
100 square feet.
what would, square feet,
what, 100 square feet. Right now, there's no requirements.
There's a
for
ZDP
building
requirement,
code.
not a building.
Commercial
What would-
zones, it's not allowed, because we don't have anything. It is in residential, correct?
Wow.
Residential, 100 square foot building is required to have a zoning development permit.
Not a building.
Okay.
You have
You're
to
not
hit-
required to have a building permit based on the square footages in the building code. However, you still have to comply with all the requirements of the building code. So you wouldn't have to have a permit, but you would still have to provide a firewall if you're within that 5 feet. Who enforces it's kind of the question.
I think Ken brings up a point, this is more about public safety, and for Jerry, it's not about stopping somebody from building that, it's that, you don't wanna, hopping from building to building. That's all what anybody's concerned about at this point, that I can understand.
John, I just wanted to point out that expense.
Oh, sure, I understand that,
If you put it in.
understand that. So, read your motion. Sorry.
Recommend
Oh,
to
fair.
the board review, consider having building plan review for auxiliary structures under 120 square feet. And since you make a good point of adjacencies to existing buildings, there's also fire separation potential there. I think that the 5-foot separation is only one of the concerns, so the review of the 120 square foot buildings or less would be what my request is.
So may I read you some draft language?
Please.
To recommend to the Board of Review, consider requiring building permits for accessory buildings less than 120 square feet in commercial zones that are within 5 feet of another building. Is that what you said?
And
I think
within-
we omit the reference to 5 feet to another building or the property line. Just leave it to 120 square feet.
And
Well-
let the Board of Review kind of wrestle with it, and with some input from regional building department and the fire department.
For
Maybe-
revised clarification, 5 feet from adjacent building or property line.
Or property line.
That works.
It seems like that answer to.
Okay.
We don't wanna pass the buck. do we?
And Ken, you said in your language, plan review, but really it's plan review and building permit.
That's the end results of the plan review, yes.
Yeah.
Anybody have any comments, questions? Everybody understand what the motion is?
So I'll make that motion.
Mr. Schroeder, second. Call for the question? Any other questions? Okay.
So can I have a procedural discussion for 1 minute?
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Well, just a one.
Okay.
Yep, the discussion was simply about whether or not the procedure required this motion to go to council before it went to the Board of Review. And we believe that it can go right to the Board of Review for them to consider this.
Excellent. Now you can call the roll.
All right,
Beginning with Mr. Ms. Ellen Carrick,
Yes.
Ken Hartsfield,
Yes.
Vicky Good,
no.
Jerry Penland,
No.
Peter Scanlon,
Yes.
Charles Schrader,
Yes.
Steve Stannard,
Yes.
and John DeVoe.
Yes.
3 opposing votes, this does pass.
So we'll forward that consideration to the Board of Review at their next meeting. And just a point of clarification, that in their process, they will be looking at the 2015 International Building Codes for both residential and commercial as soon as the Colorado Springs folks, the main office, headquarters has finished their review. And then There may be amendments to the international code, of which this could be one. That then goes to city council after the board of review makes a recommendation to modify Title 15 of the city council code.
You see what you've started.
Well, no, it's just part of the process that's
It's
underway already.
part of
Do
the
you have an
process.
idea what the schedule for regional building department to adopt the new 2015 code with their amendments?
They have already completed the residential review, but not finished the commercial review
Is there a
yet.
timeline anticipated?
Don't know. They won't give me a definite date.
You know, this kind of stuff is chump change compared to the international review. It makes everybody's house cost more money. It's done that every year. They have to do this thing. It's just, you know, I guess the houses I built back in 2004, 94 was unsafe. You know, it just keeps going and going and going. Anyway, I think we're done with this.
Yes?
We're going to reports. I have none. Anybody else have a report? You always have something.
Just a few quick things. I'd like to remind everyone our March 9th meeting is going to be canceled, but we will be having a meeting on March 23rd. We have a case. In fact, it is the conditional use permit and site plan review for the Red Baron automatic car wash. It is a quasi-judicial case, so please refrain from any ex parte communication regarding that case. And so we'll be getting those packets out the week before that meeting. On your desk this evening, you have the CML magazine, and its topic is livability and many of the things that cities do to enhance livability and quality of life in our community. And then there are two copies that I want to call your attention to. Main Street is conducting a survey currently, and the website for that survey is on your sheet, and they are having a visioning session for downtown Woodland Park that the public is invited to, and that is on the evening of March 9th or on Friday morning, the 10th. These are open to the public. We encourage you to attend if you have the time. And since we don't have a planning commission meeting on March 9th, it'd be a great thing for you to do. And then lastly, the Colorado Downtown Streets Workshop. Main Street is hosting on Wednesday, March 22nd. It is during that Wednesday afternoon. It's free, should be very interesting. CDOT and DOLA will be presenting and conducting a workshop on main streets in downtowns right here in Woodland Park. So would love for you to participate in that. You do have to register. Lunch is provided, but great opportunity to talk about our particular Main Street with guidance or facilitation from the Division of Local Affairs and CDOT. Okay, so with that, I am finished.
Please note that our next planning commission meeting and that one on the 22nd is during spring break from RE2. So if any of you have with kids and plan on going, it starts on the 17th. Anyway, so if you have any plans to go somewhere, that'll be in the middle of from the 17th to the 31st. Just something to plan for. You never kind of look at folks who got kids in school so much. All right, so what we're going to do is adjourn from our regular meeting and take a 5-minute potty break, and then we're going to go to Kip, who's going to tell us about if we got any water left. motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.